Yeah, we'll just kind of see where it goes, man. And as always, if something happens, we need to edit. If something goes bad or whatever, we'll do that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll intro us and we'll be off. Here we go. Take a swig here. All right. Here we go. Hello and welcome to this Monday edition of the PipeBomb Wrestling Podcast, the show that is for the fans, by the fans. I am your phenomenal host, Mr. Podcasting Chris Belcher. With me to my right is the Young Buck, the Indie Darling, Mr. Andy York. Andy, as we release this podcast on Monday, it is Christmas week.
Yeah, man.
We are at the end of 2021. The year has flown by.
It really has. It really has. But it's been a fun year. I mean, some of the things that we never thought would happen, i.e. CM Punk coming back, things like that, was not on my list of expectations to happen this year. But, I'm glad that it's happened. And, I'm sure we'll have more to talk about when we do our year-end review and everything. But
which is coming up this Wednesday.
Yep.
If you are listening to this on Monday, coming up this Wednesday, we will have 2021, the year-end review. We'll talk all about CM Punk. We'll talk all about just the craziness that was 2021, where we started still in a pandemic and we brought crowds back, and just what that transition was like, and the impact of the Thunderdome era. And man, that stuff seems like a lifetime ago.
It does.
But this
really
Wednesday,
does.
we are going to cover it all for you. So keep it right here at the PipeBomb Wrestling Podcast, at PBW Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. New shows available every Monday and Wednesday on the BodySlam.net YouTube channel, SportsWire Radio. That's sportnarium.com/player. It's where you can get our audio versions. And if you just like your podcast in your traditional Apple Podcast app or your Google Play app or wherever, guess what? We're right there with you. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. We are there as well.
Yep.
If you just like your traditional audio formats, there we are. All right. We are getting down to it. We thought it would be a fantastic thing as we near the end of 2021 to talk about, and we've actually been trying to put this episode together for a while, and we thought it would be a great idea to kind of save it to the end of the year when we thought there wasn't going to be a lot of stuff going on. But as we're discussing on our Wednesday shows, the wrestling world is still rolling, and it's actually really, really exciting, more than it normally is.
Yeah.
But we have banked this episode to the end of 2021. We are going to talk all about the PWI 500 list. Now, to help us with that, actually was the guy that sprang this idea for this episode. You guys know him and love him. He has been on our podcast several times. He is also a member of the BodySlam.net family. It is Mr. Trent Osborne. Welcome back, sir. How are we in your Michigan blue?
Yes, sir. I am doing great. A big go blue to all my Wolverines out there. The 31st of December can't come fast enough. I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Man, I know that we might not have sports fans in here, but I know we've got a couple. I know on SportsWire Radio, they're full of sports programming. I know my dad's listening, and he's a huge sports guy. Michigan and Georgia, the 31st, man, how are you feeling about the top four? What are we looking like? Like, realistically, I know obviously you're over the moon because Michigan is in the top four in the college football playoff. But realistically, what's your expectations?
I think the top four is much closer than anybody is giving them credit for. That includes Cincinnati. I have a lot of respect for Cincinnati and what they can do, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Don't be surprised if all four of these games end up being Big Ten style slugfest, because I really think that's what we could be seeing, especially in Michigan and Georgia.
Yep.
Michigan's a 7.5 point underdog. I try not to be a gambling fiend as much as I can, but I'm betting the house on Michigan. Michigan plus 7.5, because I have much more faith in that offense's ability to score on Georgia's defense than Stetson Bennett IV, and Georgia's offense to score on Michigan's defense. But I'm really excited. I think this is going to be the most competitive, semifinal round that we've had since the playoff was created, and I can't wait to watch it.
I'm with you, and Andy weigh in obviously too. I think Cincinnati, Alabama is going to be a lot closer than people think it is. I do think Alabama might pull away in the fourth quarter, but I think Cincinnati is going to give them a great game. And I'm going to go with Trent's Wolverines here. I think they've got enough to stop Georgia. I think it's an Alabama-Michigan final.
Yeah.
Predicting it after that, I haven't really gotten that far, but that's where I think.
Yeah, I am just a disclaimer. I'm a Kentucky Wildcat fan. We both are.
Go the real
Big Blue.
Whoa.
But I think Michigan Georgia is going to be the best semifinal game I think we've had since the playoff has been created. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I fully expect that game to combine to have no more than 17 points. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a low scoring affair, which that's my kind of game. Like, I enjoy shootouts, but like for a championship, going to championships, I'm the kind of guy that in baseball, when a pitcher has 13 strikeouts, I'm loving it. Like, I don't want to see all the home runs. I want to see all the strikeouts.
Yep.
I think Cincinnati is good. I just don't think they're good enough to hang with Alabama. I think it's going to be close, maybe for a half. And then I think Alabama is just going to do what Nick Saban does best and just toil with people from the first half and then just murder them in the second half.
Cincinnati would have had a much better shot if they would have drawn Georgia instead of Alabama. But unfortunately, the committee likes to make sure Alabama's in the final, and this is their way of doing it.
And so. I'm calling an all SEC game. I think I like Michigan. I was just as happy as anyone else when they beat Ohio State because I hate Ohio State with everything in my heart.
Amen.
But I think it is going to be an Alabama Georgia.
Why do Kentucky fans hate Ohio State with everything in them?
Because we had to deal with them for we're just so close, and I have a lot of family that's in Ohio, and they're annoying Ohio State fans, and I don't think they're that.
When I met my wife, one of the caveats to us getting married is she was not an Ohio State fan, so we were good there.
Well, my wife's from Buffalo, and I was like, you can be a Bills fan as long as you're a Kentucky Wildcat fan. She's like, that's fine. So we traded off.
There you go.
One of my best friends, Sam, is an Ohio State fan, and I'm going to clip this and send it to him because it's been 745 days since Ohio State has beaten Michigan in football. I just wanted to throw that out there for all the people listening or watching at home.
I feel like this is the same thing we were saying after Kentucky beat Florida for the first time in years. It's like we haven't lost to them in 400 and something days or whatever. Which I was there this year, and the first time we beat them at home since like 81 or whatever.
Stupid,
so that was the fun.
Nice.
But yeah.
Anyway, so there's your sports talk for all of you folks out there who are sports fans. Let's get back to your regularly scheduled wrestling program here as we talk about the I'm already getting excited. The PWI 500 is what we are here to talk about. And full disclaimer, Andy and I are already throwing shots at Trent, talking about the real big blue. But this is a true disclaimer, guys. This discussion that we are about to have, I'm going to preface this by saying we might get a little animated, but it's all in good fun. We all love each other. At the end of the day, we were cracking jokes before we started recording. We're going to be cracking jokes afterwards. Let's face it. We're arguing about men in underwear fighting for belts.
Yep.
That's all predetermined.
Yep.
So that is what we are about to embark on is
as long as nobody brings up Starrcade 97, I think we're fine.
Listen, just don't bring up Starrcade 97.
If he starts to get on your nerves, Trent, just bring it up and just back off because he'll just take over the rest of the show and it'll be entertaining. So.
I'm going to need context about this later.
Next Monday on the PipeBomb Wrestling Podcast, you will get to hear all about Starrcade 1997 and why I can't even talk.
He's already built up.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Moving right along. So next Monday on the PipeBomb Wrestling Podcast, 1 week from today, you will get to hear the Starrcade 97 rant that we have talked about for a long, long time. It's coming. I promise. Mark your calendars. But before we get there, we are going to talk all about the PWI 500. Let's give a little context, though. This is a publication that's been out, I don't even, for Lord knows how long. I have no idea. Trent, do you have a date on how long they've been doing this, or at least a guess?
I believe off the top of my head, the first PWI 500 was released in the late 80s.
Okay. Yeah, I am
88,
totally
a couple years.
okay. Yeah, I'm totally not up on my history dates on that, but it's been around for a long time. At least it's been around as long as I've been alive. So, and I'm the elder statesman of the crew here. So, it's been around for a long time. And PWI magazine comes out all throughout the year, and then they do the compilation once a year. And Trent, what dates does it run? Just so again we have context. What are the dates that it runs that they consider a physical year?
Generally, and it changes give or take a day on the year, but generally you can look at the time frame that they are grading the PWI 500 on from July 1st through June 30th of the following year.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, so this list did come out earlier in the summer. So again, like I said in the intro of the show, we kind of pushed this show back just because a lot of stuff was happening in the summer. We had SummerSlam that Jared and I went to, and then we had all kinds of stuff that went on. So this show did get pushed back, but July 1st through June the 30th is generally what we look at every year. And the PWI now has a separate women's list from the men's list. And they've been how long? Several years they've been doing that, Trent, or is that relatively new?
The women's list, I believe it's definitely within the last 15 years.
Okay, gotcha. So that makes sense. Because I did not know that, and I was texting with Trent whenever this list came out. I did not know that, Andy. So when this list is coming out, and I'm looking at the top wrestlers of 2021, I'm sitting here screaming like, "Where is Britt Baker? Like, where the heck? Like, even if there is a separate men's and women's list, I think you could make the argument that Britt belongs in the top 5 of any list."
No, I would definitely agree. I think she would fit top 5 performers of 2021 without any hesitation.
No doubt. I mean, the girl has just set the wrestling world on fire without a lot of wrestling experience coming into this year. I mean, she balanced going to dental school and wrestling school, and just ridiculous. So hats off to Britt Baker. Before we go any further, we're not really going to talk about the women's list, but shout out to Britt Baker, who deserves, she's number 1 in our hearts, right, Trent?
Yeah, exactly. I like how you're stealing CM Punk's gimmick of putting over Britt Baker.
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's funny. Well, I had to put her over. She's the face of the women's division, and she's been that way for a long time, and she should be from here to eternity. All right. Before we go to the 2021 list, we want to give a little bit of context as to where we were in 2020. Now, 2020 obviously is a bit of an anomaly because we have from July of 2019 to June of 2020, which most of that does not involve a crowd. So it's a little bit of an anomaly, but we want to give the top 5 of 2020 just to give some context, and we'll talk a little bit about these top 5 and their year. Number 1 of 2020 was Jon Moxley. Well-deserved. Number 2, Adam Cole. 3 was Chris Jericho. 4 was Drew McIntyre. 5 was Naito. And then just for context as to what we're going to talk about next, Kenny Omega was ranked number 13 in the 2020 poll. Roman Reigns was ranked number 14 in the 2020 poll. Andy, I'll throw to you first. I was putting the notes together for this, and I put the top 5 on here because I, again, wanted to give context. And it baffled my mind that I had to go further down on the list to find Roman Reigns and Kenny Omega. Like,
yeah,
why do you think they got left out of the top 10 even in the 2020 poll?
Well, I think this was because obviously Roman took some time off during the pandemic. And I
did.
think this was kind of the back half of that. And I think that definitely played a part in this. And I think Kenny hadn't really come into his own in AEW until that point of 2020. So I think that kind of plays into it. One thing that's really interesting, because you brought up that there are no crowds at this point,
right?
Or for some of this. Honestly, I think for 2020, I think there's been a real argument for if there was crowds for Drew McIntyre to be number one.
Absolutely.
If you had the crowd element and everything, but because you didn't, I think that top 5 is really, really strong. And it doesn't really surprise me that Roman and Omega were kind of in the top 15, but not in the top 10. Because like I said, they hadn't really, like Kenny and AEW hadn't really done a whole lot other than win the tag titles at that point.
Right.
And then Roman hadn't really done a whole lot since kind of coming back, and then he took that break during the pandemic to make sure everything was fine, which he definitely should have done and everything. So
Sure.
I think that definitely played a massive part into this.
Any more thoughts to add on that trend as far as where Roman and Kenny were there? And then we'll move into the top 5.
I think Andy hit the nail on the head. Kenny and Roman both, in their own special way, were kind of taking a back seat to what we had traditionally seen them doing. Kenny Omega, up until winning the AEW World Championship Eliminator Tournament at last year's Full Gear, he hadn't really been a top World Championship level player in AEW for the most part. He had the huge feud with Jon Moxley in the latter part of 2019 that was really big. But outside of that, we saw Kenny in a lot of tag team stuff. We saw him in the feud with Pac. That was fantastic. But as far as winning championships and competing in main events, Kenny wasn't really doing a lot of that. And then that's a lot of what the PWI is founded on. I don't like using this word, but a big thing to remember is that the PWI 500 is a kayfabe list. So it's not just ranking who we think the best wrestlers are, we think the best talkers. It has a lot to do with it. But on-screen success and in-storyline success matters a lot. Roman, he had that long break when he came back from his leukemia treatment. He also wasn't really thrown into the mix as being a main event person. And when he took that long break, he came back and started doing the Tribal Chief. Just like when Kenny won the Eliminator Tournament, he shot right back up to where he should be at the top of the card. Roman the same way. And we're seeing the fruits of that, the labors of that break, if you will, in this year's list.
And I think, Andy, to your point, and Trent, you're absolutely right. I think that's a very well said explanation as far as these guys are concerned. It makes sense. It was just shocking to me to have to go below number 10 to find the two guys who are at the top of 2021. Spoiler alert, in case you haven't figured it out, these two guys are at the top of 2021. But having said that, when we look back at 2020, Andy, you hit the nail on the head with Drew McIntyre. I think the argument absolutely would have been there for him to be number 1, if not number 2, had there been crowds, had he had that WrestleMania moment and taken that world championship, through the crowds and, that kind of thing. But that being said, Jon Moxley was number 1. He was the AEW world champion. He won the title the beginning of 2020, I think, at Full Revolution 2020 over Chris Jericho. I was close. And he held the title all the way to the end of 2020, December of 2020, when he lost it to Kenny Omega. But that doesn't count in this cycle that we're talking about. The name that jumped out to me, obviously Chris Jericho belongs in the top 5 for sure. He did some of the best work of his career, really putting AEW on the map from this time frame. It was, if you listen to all of his interviews, he says that it was on his shoulders, and he did a fantastic job of doing it. But the name that jumped out to me was Adam Cole. And I know that anybody that's listening to this podcast knows I'm a huge Adam Cole fan. I mean, huge. And I don't take anything away from him because he was in NXT and not on the main roster. And obviously the writers of this magazine don't either, but there are a lot of wrestling critics out there, or a lot of wrestling journalists out there, who would knock him for not being on a main roster and would not put him up at this spot simply because he was in NXT, not on Raw, SmackDown, WrestleMania, what have you. Andy, having said those two things, we saw how dominant Jon Moxley was. And to give context of how dominant Adam Cole was, Adam Cole won the NXT championship right around the time this list started coming out, or right around the time frame of this list. And he was NXT champion for the majority of this entire run. I think he lost it at Great American Bash to Keith Lee, which would have been in June of 2020. So literally this whole time, is there an argument to be made Adam Cole should have been placed ahead of John Moxley.
Yeah, I think there is an argument that could have been made for that, because I've said it multiple times in here. I think Adam Cole is the greatest NXT superstar of all time, and probably the greatest NXT champion of all time. I think Finn Balor is right up there with that as well. Finn Balor's run was his first run through NXT was absolutely amazing. But I think there is a legitimate argument for Adam Cole to be number one in this list, because not only did he have that lengthy title reign, but he had some of the best matches in NXT during that time, some of the best matches in pro wrestling at that time. Because you got to remember, this was still the NXT that was known for its wrestling, not the NXT 2.0 that we have now, but it was the black and gold brand that its pride was in its wrestling ability and its storytelling, but in its wrestlers and the wrestling ability.
Yep.
So I think there is definitely an argument that could be made for Adam Cole to be number one on that list.
Trent, I'll throw to you with the same thing.
I think an argument can definitely be made. Adam Cole had a fantastic year. Like you said, he held the NXT championship almost the entire time. The main thing, there's two big factors that separate John Moxley from Adam Cole in that aspect. One is that John Moxley was a major star in multiple companies, and that's a really big factor when they look at that thing, is the diversity of where you're wrestling and who you're wrestling. John Moxley held the IWGP United States Heavyweight Championship for the majority of last year. He had a fantastic G1. I believe he won his first 5 or 6 matches with wins over guys like Tetsuya Naito and Tomohiro Ishii, and those matches were huge. His G1 run was a great success, added on to AEW, where, and this is the other thing that's huge, in AEW, he did not lose a single match all year long. And
Period.
And in WWE, unless your name is Roman Reigns, in this year, they don't have an issue beating their top champions all the time. I mean, Lashley was losing on Raw like 3 weeks in a row at one point during his WWE title reign.
Right.
And Adam Cole lost matches too. Not to say that Adam Cole wasn't booked strongly or that he was booked poorly, because of course he wasn't. But you compare Adam Cole's run to a guy who was wrestling pretty much every other week and did not lose a single match on national television. That's a big feather in Moxley's cap. And I think while the NXT championship is recognized as a world championship by the PWI 500, there's levels to this. I think the AEW World Championship does hold more prestige than the NXT championship in this case.
And I think part of that plays into Drew McIntyre as well, because you got to remember, Drew dropped the belt to Randy randomly for a month. I think it was like a month that he lost the belt, and so I think that definitely plays a part. Yeah, but that definitely plays a part in it, because even then, Drew still lost every once in a while on Raw, and that's one thing that, like, John Moxley, like you said, never lost in that year. Kenny hadn't really lost during his title reign. Roman now hasn't lost since, we talked about this on Wednesday's episode. Roman hasn't lost since like 2019, some point in 2019. So all of that really does play play into this list for sure.
All right, so that pretty much covers 2019. 2019, 2020. The PWI list of 2020, that gives us a good basis of where we're going. So I'm going to read off the 2021 list, and then we'll talk about the 3 of the top 5 before we head into the top 2. So the top 5 of 2021, number 1 is Kenny Omega. Number 2 is Roman Reigns. 3 is Bobby Lashley. 4 is Drew McIntyre. And number 5 is Kota Ibushi. Now, before we started recording, Trent, you mentioned that you may have had an issue with Kota Ibushi being number 5. You being the resident expert of all things New Japan, enlighten us as to why you think Ibushi was rated a little higher and who should have been in his place.
Well, I don't think necessarily that Ibushi was bad at 5. I mean, he did win the G1 Climax. He did unify the IWGP Heavyweight and Intercontinental Championships at Wrestle Kingdom this past year. But he lost it in a month to Will Ospreay. and never really recovered that main event status. And some of that was his fault. But none of that was really his fault because he had some issues with his health and things that kind of got in the way of that. But either way, he was starting to fall a bit off. I think Shingo Takagi, when the next PWI 500 comes out, don't be shocked to see Shingo Takagi in the top 3 or 4 because of the year he's had, and that even bleeds into that before. I think Shingo Takagi was somebody that I thought would be higher. I thought, and this is a bit out there, I thought Darby Allin would be a lot higher. With the biggest star he's become, Darby has a fantastic record in AEW. He had a great TNT title reign. You really saw him ascend to be that next level of star this past year. I was a bit surprised to not see him higher. Coda's definitely not bad at 5, though. I do think they got the top 4 spot on, and I think they got him in the correct order with McIntyre, Lashley, Roman, and Kenny.
So before we move on any further, just again to give context, 6 through 10 is Moxley, Will Ospreay at 7, Finn Balor at 8, Takagi is at 9, and Rich Swann making an appearance at number 10. Had a nice year. Andy, what about Finn Balor getting some love in the top 10 after the fantastic return to NXT that he had and that great run as champion and just some really good matches that he had?
Yeah, it kind of shocks me that he would be higher than Karrion Kross on this list in some ways. But I think it's somewhat deserved. Honestly, I think the person that would have been a lot higher on this list if they didn't have injury and some other issues that came up, I think Will Ospreay could have very easily been a lot higher on this list. I know I'm the indie guy on the podcast. I'm not the biggest Will Ospreay fan in a lot of ways. But I think he's extremely talented, and I think if he didn't get injured and would have kept the IWGP Heavyweight Championship and all of that and gone through the things I think they had planned for him, I think he would have been top 5, maybe 6, just right outside this list.
Gotcha. Trent, I will throw to you for this next point. You mentioned that you thought the top 4 guys were in correct order as far as Kenny, Roman, Bobby, and Drew. As opposed to the 2020 run or the 2020 list, seeing 3 in this day and age where AEW is so hot, and it seems like that now that there's a new, let me figure out how to say this.
A new toy.
It seems because there's a new toy in town. And there's more, it's more of a company that caters more towards maybe some of these wrestling journalists more than WWE does. Are you surprised to see 3 WWE guys in the top 5 of this list in 2021?
I'm not at all. The PWI 500 has always been slanted towards WWE because they've been the worldwide leader in the industry for so long.
Sure.
From the year 2000 to the year 2017, there was only one year where the number 1 wasn't from WWE, and that was AJ Styles on his TNA run in 2010. And now there's a beneficiary, there's a company now with similar reach and similar power, not mainstream power yet, obviously, but AEW is up there. And I think the reason why AEW has had the past 2 number 1s is that they book their champions better than WWE does. That's what I think it comes down to at the end of the day. I mean, Jon Moxley is a world champion, did not lose a single time. I mean, even this past year, this list, someone I could have brought up that could have been number 5 was Moxley when he was at 6. The only 2 matches he lost on this list were to Kenny Omega singles-wise, and they were both due to plenty of shenanigans going on in those. Right. Whereas you have Bobby Lashley, who's booked really strong. He wins all of his big matches, and he wins them convincingly. But then he loses to Xavier Woods on Raw. No disrespect to Xavier Woods, but stuff like that happens. And Drew McIntyre was as big of a victim of that as anybody. I think Drew should have been higher on this list, but he had his momentum messed with a lot. You don't see the top guys in AEW have their momentum messed with like you do the guys in WWE. For the most part, because Roman has been the exception to the rule, and we'll get to that in a little bit.
We'll get to that. Andy, one more question for you. Trent just mentioned Drew McIntyre, and you mentioned him earlier about how his momentum got stalled and things like that. I personally, when I look at this list, if I'm looking at July of 2020 through June 30th of 2021, I almost think Drew's a little too high on this list. Do you think he belongs in the top 5, or do you think he should have been right outside? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, he didn't lose the title until right before Mania, right? Like right after Elimination Chamber, I think it was, is when he lost it to Miz on the cash in, and then Bobby beat Miz the next night, and then you had the match going into WrestleMania with Bobby and Drew. While Drew didn't necessarily hold a championship this entire time, Drew still was one of the most dominant guys in WWE.
Mm-hmm.
I think Roman Reigns obviously is a very dominant guy. Bobby Lashley, we talked about this before, was one of the most dominant WWE champions in the last decade, really, in a lot of ways, because he lost on Raw, but he didn't lose as much as some of these other guys have lost over the past couple of years. And he just kind of crushed everybody he was in the ring with. But Drew went on a really strong run without the championship, and went through. He had some absolutely amazing matches with Sheamus on TV and at Extreme Rules, I believe it was.
Yep.
And he had some other really, really high profile matches that he took care of and knocked it out of the park and everything else. So I think he might be a little high on this list, but I definitely think he is a top 5.
All right. I like it. Okay, before we get into this 1 versus 2 debate, I just want to remind everybody that this is the PipeBomb Wrestling Podcast, a show that is for the fans, by the fans. We appreciate you checking us out, whether this is your first time checking us out or you've been with us for a long time. We appreciate your support. We would not be where we are without the support of our listeners, so thank you so much. We also wouldn't be where we are without bodyslam.net. Their YouTube channel. We appreciate them bringing us into the family, as well as Sports Wire Radio. Sportnarium.com/player is where you can find us every Monday and Wednesday with the audio versions of our new episodes. And as always, if you don't like these non-traditional formats of where you can find us, just turn on your Apple Podcast app or turn on your Google Play app. We are right there. Just search us, subscribe, hit that 5-star review. We would appreciate it very much. All right, guys, here we go. That disclaimer at the beginning of the show that applies right now, because as soon as this list came out, we were all 3 texting about the results. Let's put it that way, whether we agreed or whether we disagreed. And that was really kind of what sparked. Trent was talking about how he was drafting together an article for bodyslam.net about the PWI 500 and some of the different lists and things like that. I was like, well, I tell you what, I disagree. So that sparked what we're about to do right now, which is the top 2 of 2021 is Kenny Omega and Roman Reigns in that order. Andy, you have gone on record numerous times of saying you might be Switzerland in this situation.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made for both guys.
Well, we're about to hear both of them.
I really do, because both guys were the dominant top guys in their company and the 2 biggest companies in the world in professional wrestling. So the argument is definitely there for both guys.
Okay.
I think from the PWI criteria that they follow, I think Kenny hits more of those marks than Roman does.
I can agree with that.
And so I think that plays into a lot of it. Both guys have had their really high moments. Both guys have had some moments where we look at, I believe it was Revolution 2020 or 2021 with the whole death match debacle thing that kind of took place. But Roman's had a couple of matches that the booking didn't really make sense. I'm trying to think when Extreme Rules was for this. It was not during this time period with Finn Balor and the whole top rope.
No, it was after
thing. I think it was after.
But Kevin Owens was.
Kevin Owens, sorry, the last man standing match at the Rumble, didn't really
do him any favors.
Mesh very well either. So I think both guys have had more high moments and low moments. I just think for me and for the PWI list, I think Kenny marks more of the criteria, and I'm sure we'll dive into that criteria and go from there.
So you're not going to be Switzerland. Okay.
I am Switzerland. I think there is an argument to be made for both. My opinion may change after this podcast, but as of this moment right now, I think Kenny is number 1, Roman is number 2.
Well, for those of you who are watching on the YouTube version of our show, you can see where my allegiance lies. And so you can guess if Andy's going to play the middle and you know where my allegiance lies. I'm going to throw to Trent first because he has said several times already on this podcast that he thinks this list is 100% spot on correct. So, Trent, I will throw to you first. You're going to defend Kenny Omega as the number 1 wrestler in the PWI 500 in 2021. Do tell why he is the man.
Well, first off, I just want to say that it really stinks for Roman Reigns. I want to say that because Roman had a fantastic year. He had an all-time great year, and I'm not going to deny it for 1 second. I'm a big Roman Reigns fan. I know some people are starting to sour on the bloodline stuff, saying it's getting repetitive and all that. I'm not one of those people. I think it's great. I think Roman's killing it right now. I think in WWE, even for a guy like Roman Reigns, who is as protected as he has been throughout his career, to go an entire year and not lose a single time is absurd. And I don't think we should take any credit away from him for that. But the best way I can compare it to is Roman Reigns is kind of like the 1998 Utah Jazz.
Ooh.
They're really good. They're really, really good.
I heard this comparison on the radio the other day. They were comparing the 98 Utah Jazz to, oh, crap. Who were they comparing? I don't remember. Anyway, your point for sure. Hit the nail on the head. Go ahead.
Yes, the 1998 Utah Jazz. Karl Malone, who's a bad dude, by the way. Look it up. Not a good person. John Stockton, Jeff Hornacek. Just a fantastic top-to-bottom team. Never won a championship, though. And it's really sad. But when you look at look at the opposition. Yep. Look, 23 in red. The Worm. Hit. Go down the line. The Serb. Steve Kerr. I actually have, writing that article, I have a long list of the accomplishments of both of these men from this past year. And I'll start with Roman. Roman was the Universal Champion for 306 days between the time periods from when this list was curated, the time frame for when they were looking at accomplishments. He ended the period as champion. He was undefeated in singles competition, which, like I said, in WWE is no small feat. They don't really protect guys like that anymore. That's a huge accomplishment. 9 matches rated 4 stars or higher by the Wrestling Observer newsletter, which if people say Roman can't go in the ring, he proved a lot of people wrong this year. He was putting on great matches on a not a weekly basis because he wasn't wrestling on a weekly basis, but on a monthly basis. Every time he got in the ring and the title was on the line, he was putting on a show, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. Kenny Omega's accomplishments in the time frame from when this year was started. I'm reading off my phone. This is very unprofessional, but the list is really long.
No, go for it. I don't
want to miss anything. The list is kind of long. 67 days as the AEW World Tag Team Champions. He entered the period as champion, so that's why it's only 2 months out of the reign. Won the AEW World Championship Eliminator Tournament, eliminating Hangman Page at Full Gear this past year. Beat John Moxley in an extremely memorable exploding barbed wire death match. I believe it's the first televised one in the history of the United States. We're not going to talk about what happened after the match. Defeated Rich Swann to unify the Impact and TNA World Heavyweight Championships in a winner-take-all match at Impact Rebellion 2021. Held the Impact World Championship for 68 days and ended the period as champion. His reign went on longer than that. 365 days as the AAA Mega Champion. That is their World Championship for those who aren't as familiar with AAA and how they do their championships. Undefeated in singles competition across all companies, including Impact, AAA, and All Elite Wrestling. 19 matches rated 4 stars or higher by the Wrestling Observer newsletter. and a 5-star match, mainly sticking out with Rey Fenix from New Year's Smash Night 1. Now, if we go to, like we talked about, the criteria of the PWI 500, win-loss record, that's a push. I believe Kenny, off the top of my head, I believe Kenny wrestled one more match than Roman, and they were both undefeated in singles competition, so I'll say that's a push. Technical ability, I think Roman, I don't think sit here and argue about who's a better technical wrestler here out of Roman Reigns and Kenny Omega. Success against the highest grade of competition, Kenny Omega wrestling for world championships in 3 separate companies. I'd say I'd give him the edge there. Success against the most diverse competition and activity. I'm beating a dead horse here at this point, wrestling for 3 separate companies, being the top man in 3 separate companies, holding 3, technically 4 major world championships at the exact same time. It's never been done. It's not that, and this is why I say, I'm not saying this to be facetious. I'm not saying this to patronize Roman Reigns. Roman had an all-time great year that would stack up against most people. But Kenny Omega may legitimately have had the best year ever. This is late 80s Ric Flair NWA levels of stuff from Kenny Omega that we're seeing this past year. And it's not a slight to Roman Reigns at all. Like I said, it really sucks that Roman had to be in the same year as this Kenny Omega, in the same way that it really stinks for Jazz fans that they had to see their team run into Bulls in the finals every year. But I just don't see what argument there is to be had for Roman being ranked a bit above Kenny, respectfully.
I will say this. Roman's character is better. I feel like the quality of opponents is better. I feel like, and I will say that by, okay, I'll go down the list. Edge, twice. John Cena, Brock Lesnar, Daniel Bryan, multiple times, Kevin Owens, Cesaro, Rey Mysterio, Drew McIntyre, and I think that covers, I mean, you could say Bray Wyatt and Braun Strowman, but I'll leave those guys out. Not to take anything away from those guys, but I'll leave that little debacle because Roman only wrestled for like 10 seconds. Whatever. Anyway, so I will say his quality of opponents is better. Here's where my argument lies. And this is just like you put over Roman Reigns to begin the whole thing. I'll put over Kenny Omega. Dude can wrestle. Like, dude is top notch. Like, I don't think the dude's ever had a bad match. 100% I'll own up to that. And I have nothing against Kenny Omega. I really don't. Is his style of wrestling my favorite? No, but I'm not going to let that cloud my judgment. I mean, the guy is, just, it's ridiculous. He's that good. Like, I don't even have words. He's that good. So I'm going to put him over. What I am going to say is I'm not holding this against Kenny Omega. I'm holding this against the PWI criteria because I don't think it's fair. Because Roman Reigns doesn't have the opportunity to hold 4 major championships at once. That's where my argument lies. And I'm not saying that maybe I can't use that argument because the PWI, that's part of their criteria. But to me, that's not fair because Roman Reigns does not have that shot. If Roman Reigns has that shot, do you think he's going to go wrestle for another company? Maybe, maybe not. We will never know, though, because he doesn't have that opportunity. So I feel like that is not a fair comparison because Roman's not eligible. Does that make sense? So if Roman was eligible, I'd say, sure, all bets are off. Kenny Omega wins 4 championships at once. Great. He's number 1. It's not that way. So the way that I look at it, and maybe this is through a different lens, is I look at Roman Reigns WWE versus Kenny Omega AEW. So when I put those two side by side, that's where I give it all day to Roman Reigns.
Well, kind of going off of both of what you guys have said, I think while it isn't necessarily fair for, because Roman doesn't have the opportunity to go after multiple championships, what Kenny has done is so unprecedented that you can't really discount what Kenny has done outside of AEW as well. And so I think that definitely should play a part into it. My thing is, with the quality of opponents, while yes, he did fight Cena and Edge and Brock and Daniel Bryan and Finn and Cesaro and Drew McIntyre and some of these other guys, he also had some matches with Jey Uso, who, don't get me wrong, Jey Uso is a great wrestler, but he is not up there in Jey Uso is not the same as a John Moxley.
Sure.
Jey Uso is not the same as a Christian, really, to be honest. And so I think Kenny has had somewhat better quality opponents. Maybe not as well-known quality opponents, but I think he's had better quality opponents. And I don't think you can take away him winning basically 4 major championships because, one, that's unprecedented, but 2, that kind of just shows that his draw is just not in AEW. So I'm not saying that's not true for Roman. Roman's draw is definitely outside of WWE, but he has been able to go to TNA and go to AAA and make them the most relevant they've been in a long, long time. And I think that definitely plays a massive role into this. And like both of you guys are right, they have had unprecedented years back to back in the same year. I think right now, if we're looking at for 2022, I think Roman Reigns is the clear favorite to be the PWI top number 1 of the top 500 because his dominance has continued into this year, whereas Kenny's dominance hasn't necessarily continued yet. But I don't think you can discredit what Kenny did between July 1st and June 30th. I think if you look at it from top to bottom with the criteria and with the match quality and everything else, I still think Kenny gets somewhat of the edge because his matches were a little better. His storylines weren't as convoluted at times as the Roman Reigns, Kevin Owens one, and a couple others like that. So I think the edge kind of leans toward Kenny in that way. But I think Roman does feel more dominant than Kenny did at the same time. So I think there is kind of a equal balance at times. But I think because of Kenny's ability to go out and become a champion of 4 different companies, definitely should be played into and gives him that little bit of an edge.
I agree that I don't want to take it away from him that he has the ability to do that, or that his wrestling acumen, if I can use that word, goes beyond AEW, or because it didn't start in AEW,
right?
So like I totally can understand that. To me, it's just not. I can't. I don't know. I just can't see that. Go ahead, Trent.
I think, well, one thing I want to bring up that I think is important to mention is that all of Kenny's opponents for the World Championship in AEW were built up extremely well for Kenny, including even Jungle Boy winning the Battle Royal at, I believe, Double or Nothing to get his shot. Whereas you look at WWE, where Rey Mysterio was doing absolutely nothing and was plucked out of obscurity to wrestle Roman Reigns, lost to Roman Reigns, went right back to obscurity. Cesaro was exactly the same way. I believe the Cena match happened after the criteria ended. I believe that match was in August. I don't know that.
That's correct. That's correct. That's my bad.
Yeah, no, you're good. I was about to say, I'm not sure about that, but I believe that because that was SummerSlam. SummerSlam's usually in August. Excuse my camera. But I think that's not Roman's fault, but that's the big knock everyone has had on Roman's run as champion, is that nobody else is kind of getting up to that level in a way. I mean, he wrestled Drew, who's at that level. I believe it was a non-title match, if I'm not mistaken. That was Survivor Series, correct?
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. And that's kind of my thing about the level of competition. And that's not Roman's fault. And I think Roman is, to an extent, there's 2 sides to this coin. Is he hindered by the fact that he can't go wrestle for other companies in WWE? Yes, he is to an extent. But what I would also look at on the other side of that coin is that there have been plenty of people outside of WWE who have had the opportunity to do what Kenny Omega did this year, and they never have. The closest I can think of in the last decade or so is AJ Styles' indie run right before he went to WWE, when he was the IWGP Heavyweight Champion, the Rev Pro British Heavyweight Champion, was wrestling for the Ring of Honor World Championship when it was extremely hot, when Jay Lethal was a world champion. AJ had a great year then, but what Kenny Omega has done, it legitimately may never be done again.
Sure.
And I think it's like, it's an old sports cliche, but it's like running into a buzzsaw. You're right that it's not fair to Roman Reigns, but it wouldn't be fair to anyone I mean, you look at Kazuchika Okada in 2017, he was PWI 500 #1, arguably the greatest from an in-ring standpoint any wrestler ever. And I look at that when he had the longest IWGP Heavyweight Championship reign of all time, and I compare that to what Kenny Omega did this year, and even that doesn't stack up. And New Japan, especially at that time, were booking their champions extremely well. Kenny, there's no bar to compare what Kenny did to this year. There is no year you can be like, oh, that's like this, that's like that. Kenny Omega, and I'm glad Andy brought up the point of what he did for Impact Wrestling. Do you remember I hadn't watched Impact Wrestling in probably 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave it a good 2 months when Kenny was there. Even when Kenny was not there, it brought a ton of eyes to that product. I was watching AAA shows for the first time ever, and I know plenty of people were. Roman may be a bigger name in the mainstream just from the WWE moniker, but if we're talking impact on the world of professional wrestling, Kenny Omega had a bigger impact than anybody, and I don't think it's close.
Hang on one second. There's some feedback. I don't know why that is. Is it gone? Hello?
I think it's still there.
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Can you hear that feedback, Andy? Is it still there?
Like a little.
A little. It's on both of our ends. Hang on. Is it there now?
No.
Okay, is it still there?
A little bit.
A little bit.
I think it might be that I think my AC just kicked on.
Okay.
I think it's what it could be.
Okay. It's just barely there, so we'll just
Sorry about that.
That's okay. No problem. We'll just get ready to wrap up anyway. So we'll just make it work. It'll be fine. Okay. 50 something like that. Okay, here we go. All right. So I'm gonna go to full screen here, that way we can kind of wrap it up. What was the last thing you said, Trent?
If we're comparing their impacts in wrestling, I think Kenny's had the biggest impact.
Yeah, gotcha. Wrestling world. Gotcha. Okay. I mean, I definitely understand that. I get that. I'm not going to argue the impact that Kenny had. I think there's some holes there that maybe it's me personally that I just don't agree with. But as far as looking at the landscape of wrestling world, like I get it. I understand. I just think that for the biggest company in the world, that is WWE, who has been the longest standing company for the longest time, who has been, like you mentioned earlier, Trent, has dominated the PWI 500 for so many years. For someone to be as dominant as they currently are in Roman Reigns, and again, I'll drop off before John Cena here. For someone to be as dominant as Roman Reigns has been, I just think that's where number one should lie, in the biggest company, in the biggest name. And you equate Kenny Omega to, we can't compare it to whoever, because we just can't, I honestly compare like this run of Roman Reigns to a Hulk Hogan. Like this is Hulk Hogan status right here. And to me, as much as I hate to say this, Hulk Hogan better be on every freaking Mount Rushmore that has ever existed in wrestling history, just because of what the guy has done for the wrestling business. While Roman Reigns might not have the big pop culture impact that Hogan immediately had, maybe he gets there. And I'm not saying that we need to take that into consideration. What I'm saying is this is status that WWE hasn't seen in. I don't even think John Cena reached this status. Let's put it that way. I know Cena was clobbering people in the 2010s and, even before that. But I don't think this is even close to that. So I guess for me personally, and maybe that's me looking inside of my WWE bubble, but I just think there are, again, I'm going to go back to the multi-championships. I'm not taking it away from Kenny. I just don't like the argument I feel like you're comparing apples to oranges as far as that goes. So should there almost be a WWE list and an outside of WWE list just because of the parameters that are put on it? Yeah, maybe there should be. But, if you're talking about overall in the wrestling world, I get what y'all are saying, but I personally am going to stick with Roman, and I think you both are going to stick with Kenny, and I think that's totally fine. I think we're wrestling fans, like I said at the beginning of this show, we're arguing about guys in underwear who are fighting over belts, and it's all not real. But to each his own, right?
Yeah, and one other thing I'll add real quick is Roman is definitely on this dominant run right now, but I don't think the dominant side of it came out until Money in the Bank, John Cena returns, and then all of that happens.
You don't think it was before that, like WrestleMania with Edge and Bryan?
I think that was the starting point of it, and I think Cena added to it. But I think before that, I don't think it was nearly as dominant as it is now. And that's what I'm saying. I think this is building.
Okay. Do you think though that the no fans in the building attributed to that?
Maybe. I mean, maybe from a ticket, like for WWE to hold off on that until we have fans and then giving that, which I get that. And that plays part into kind of his comparison of the Utah Jazz of like, yeah, you were good. You had a really great year. And yeah, you were a little hindered by not having fans, but kind of Kenny was too in a lot of ways. Sure. And it didn't really slow him down either. And I'm not saying it slowed down Roman either. I'm just saying his dominance is going into this year more so than Kenny's. And I think, like I said before, I think Roman is the number one guy right now in all of professional wrestling. I don't think there's any other argument for anyone else other than Roman right now. But that doesn't really start for me until maybe after WrestleMania, maybe after his match with Daniel Bryan on SmackDown, and then we get to Money in the Bank, Cena's return, SummerSlam, Brock's return. Now we're kind of rolling into this thing where they're going to finish us off at some point with Roman versus The Rock, which will even add even more into this. But I think as from the criteria and the timestamp, I think Kenny has been the most dominant out of Roman and out of anybody else.
Trent, any more final comments before we wrap this thing up? I know we've gone kind of long, but this is a fun back and forth.
It is, and I think the biggest takeaway that everyone should have from it is that Kenny Omega is really good. Roman Reigns is really good. The fact that both of these guys can have the years that they had in the same calendar year should tell you what a great state pro wrestling is in. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from this year, that we can have, on one side here in a totally different universe, basically, you have Roman Reigns having this great run, and then Kenny Omega's doing these things that we've never seen before. And I think it's really exciting. I love watching Roman Reigns work. And I love watching Kenny Omega work, and I think at the end of the day, we should all be friends. And like you said, it is different.
And I'll say one other thing. With Kenny and Roman being in the spots they are, if they don't have the type of dominant year they do, I think Bobby Lashley could very easily be number one with the dominant championship run he had in WWE. So that's just going to show that wrestling has evolved so much, and it's in such a great spot right now that even your best year has to be better because everyone else around you is getting better. And it's this list shows that the wrestling business is not going away anytime soon, but is like getting better and evolving and becoming something even better.
I mean, 10 years ago, did we ever think we'd sit here and say Bobby Lashley is close to the top of the PWI 500? I mean, and look what we're sitting here talking about. And then just 3-4 years ago, talking about how Roman Reigns is the clear-cut guy for 2022, and we can make the argument for 2021. Trent, who in the world thought we would say either of those things about those two guys? But here we sit.
Exactly. And I don't want to date anybody here on the podcast, but when I was 7 years old, Bobby Lashley was one of my favorite wrestlers in 2006. Bobby's always been one of my favorites. This year has been so gratifying to me because I've always been a bleeding heart Bobby Lashley defender, even when things weren't the best. I think this run he's had is great. I think the dynamic between him and MVP is one of the best things going in wrestling. And he seems like a legitimately really good dude. So I'm happy to see him have the success he's had.
That was back when he was an ECW champion. He was wrestling Umaga at WrestleMania and shaving Vince McMahon's head. My goodness, how times have changed. All right, boys. I really think that's going to do it. I mean, I don't think we're beating a dead horse at this point. You know, they're not going to change my mind, and I'm clearly not going to change theirs. So it's fine. It is what it is. We can all agree to disagree, and we can move on, and we can laugh and cut up, and it'll be fine. But in the meantime and in between time, make sure you follow us all on social media. I'll flash everybody's up on the screen. Trent is at Trent Osborne FS, and that is OSBORNEFS. Andy is at Andy_PBWP. I am at Chris Belcher 24. The show is at PBW Podcast. That's all on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Make sure you follow. Make sure you're tuning in every Monday and Wednesday to check out our brand new content on the BodySlam.net YouTube channel, on SportsWire Radio, and wherever you find your podcast. We are everywhere, ladies and germs. We are coming to the end of 2021. What an incredible, crazy year that it has been. Please make sure you are tuning in this coming Wednesday. Andy and myself will be doing our year in review, where we take a look back at January to December, the good, the bad, the Vince Russo, as we like to say. But the good, the bad, the Thunderdome, the no crowds, the comeback crowds, the WrestleManias, the full gears, the Revolution. Oh, man, we got to talk about the exploding ring.
Yeah, we do.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, we got to talk about that. All of those things. And for you guys, the return of CM Punk. All of that coming up this Wednesday on the year in review. Oh my gosh. Oh, anyway. All right. Hey, Trent, thanks for hopping on, man. We really always appreciate your insight, man. It's a lot of fun.
Always. I love coming on here. I love getting to chit chat with you guys about everything. So anytime you guys want me back on, just let me know. Thank you.
Absolutely. There's an open door. We will make sure to make that happen. And you will be back on sooner rather than later. For Mr. Andy York, my name is Chris Belcher. Thanks so much for joining us here on the PipeBomb Wrestling Podcast. We will catch you guys down the road. And we're out.